Okay friends, we are back again with some important concepts I wanted to share with you in C# programming. Alright, I'm going to make several different videos, but this one is going to be a useful program that maybe can demonstrate for people that are new why you would create a program and how you would do something kind of useful. So let's get started and I'll just go through it and show you what I was thinking about. First of all, we're going to use VS Code because it seems to be pretty popular. A lot of interest in VS Code. For one, it's free. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Assume you already have this installed. Create a folder on my desktop that's empty called C#. Okay? I'm going to fire up VS Code. I want to make sure I'm starting clean, that way you don't miss anything. Alright, this was already in there. And I'm going to get rid of this because we're going to start clean. Okay. Now I have it zoomed in really far, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And I know it's a little bit harder, but we're going to do .NET new console. And you need to make sure you are under the right folder here where you want your files to go, and you can look up here for those. Now I use my up arrow key to find what I'd already typed in, .NET new console. Make sure your cursor's inside, and it's going to create a couple files for us. If you see this file, it is a C# project file, CSPROJ, and this file keeps all your project folders together. So just think about that as a file to kind of keep all your references and everything, and the .NET framework you're using and that sort of stuff. It's kind of like a metadata. Alright, so we're back in our brand new program, and remember I said I don't like namespaces unless you need them, so let's get rid of that. I don't like to see code that we do not need, and we're going to clean this up. Now you don't need to worry about, there's probably a setting somewhere where you can hide the number of references. And I'm going to pause the video and figure out how to do that right now and tell you, because there's no need to see stuff we don't need to see. This will be useful later, but right now we don't reference this by anything else, so why look at it? Let me figure out how to do that. Okay, I was able to disable those little squiggly lines and those references that we were talking about, and it took a while, but I found it. So you have to find your user settings JSON file. The JSON file we'll talk about later, but it is basically, in this case, it is a configuration file that tells Visual Studio how to do things. And what we have to do is set this to false. Can you see this code here? It's called a code lens. And we have to set this setting to false. But then I said, well, where do I go? Because normally you have a settings.json file right here, but it was missing. I couldn't find it. Well, I was able to find it, and we had to go to C, users, your username, mine happens to be T-Man, that'll be different for you, app data, roaming, code, user, settings.json. It is buried very deep in there. If we open that with Notepad, I had to add this line right here, C#.references code lens.enabled false, and then I saved it. I had to close Visual Studio Code, open it again, and then they were gone, because those would be useful in some cases, but it's not useful for us, so why look at them, right? Okay, so they're gone, and we have our basic program here. So we've started from a very basic hello world program, and what I'm going to do, start over, so we start fresh. Okay, so we've got our C# program here, and all it does is do hello world. Let's run it and just prove that it's doing that. I go to the debugger here, I hit run. Alright, and down here's our hello world. I only wanted to do that to prove it was working. Okay, and we didn't have any problems. So what I wanted to do tonight was kind of prove to you what a program would do, what a programmer might need to do. And what we're going to do tonight is open a file, read it, and write it to another file. And then we might do a little bit more than that. So this might be a common operation that you might do. So what I did was I went under my C temp folder and I made an input file. And what I put in this input file is just a text file. I put a few names in here: Tom, Bill, Sam, and Sarah. What we're going to do is read through this line by line and write it to another file. And I'm going to start to show to you what you can do with reading and writing to files and how to manipulate data. And the great majority of what we do will, as programmers, some of the basics will come right from this very video. So we're going to take some names, and then later I'm going to add some IDs, and we're going to sort these names, and we're going to do some different things with it. But right now, let's just open and read this file. Tom, Bill, Sam, and Sarah. I'm going to move it to the side. ctemp input file. Okay, so .NET has what's called a stream reader. But before you can use it, you have to add a reference because it is deep within the .NET framework. And we have to add a reference under system called System.io. That means input output. And input output has a lot of different things within it. One, a lot of file stuff. File.open, .delete, .copy. You can copy files, you can move files, you can read them, write them, you can do all kinds of things with files. But since we're going to be reading, we're going to use what's called a stream reader. And I'm going to create a new object, sr equals new stream reader. Okay? Now, when you do this, you have to pass in some kind of argument. It's going to need an argument. And one way it tells you to do this, you have to remember that anytime you see these parentheses, you're looking at a function. A function takes in parameters. It may or may not take in one or many parameters. And these parameters tell what this function should do or build. And in this case, if you want to know, you have to hit the open parentheses, and you can cycle through it right here. Now this looks a little bit different in Visual Studio versus Visual Studio Code. To be honest, it's a little clunkier here in Visual Studio Code. But what it does is it tells you up here how it takes a string and a path, okay? So we already have that, and I'm going to pass in a simple string, C:\\temp input.txt. Now, you'll notice that there's some problems here. When C# sees these slashes, it thinks you're doing something. It doesn't know that you're creating a string. So one way to tell it you're doing a string is to put the @sign. The @sign will tell this, hey, everything in between these is a string. Just ignore any backslashes and just call it a string. That's one way to do that. Okay? So now, notice that we've kind of hard-coded our path here. And I don't want to do that because we want to reuse this path. And we don't have to rewrite this over and over and over. And so what I'm going to do here is create a variable, a string variable called path. And you can name it whatever you want, path or folder. I'm going to call it working folder. I'm going to set it to C:\temp. That's our working folder, okay? And remember, once you have a backslash, you have to use an @ symbol, otherwise it thinks it's a backslash. Okay, when you see the squiggly lines, that means that you've declared a variable, but it's not being used. So what we're going to do instead of using this right here, we don't need the @ symbol anymore because we don't have any backslashes. We're going to pass in working folder, and then a +sign, and then an input. And what it's going to do is going to take this variable, all of this stuff here, replace it here, and it's going to add concatenate input.txt, okay? And remember, you have to be careful because sometimes if you forget this, what's it going to do? It's going to add temp and go straight to your file, and it's going to look like temp input.txt. But with the backslash, you know that it knows it's a folder. So now we're passing into our stream reader, working folder, plus the input file. And now we're going to let's go ahead and just try something very easy. We're going to make another string, We're going to call it a line, and we're going to do stream reader dot read line. And of course, what do you think that's going to do? It's going to read the first line, and read line means it's going to read it and move to the next line, but it's going to put in this variable right here of string the first line, which we already said of that text file, we already said it was Tom. Excuse me, Tom is going to go on that line. Now, what you could do, and you wouldn't want to do it like this, line 2 equals sr.readLine. If you did that, it would pass the second line in, but we're not going to do that. Let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. Let's put a breakpoint. You click somewhere in here, you put a breakpoint, go to debugger, hit debug. Okay, so we've hit our line, and if you hover over it, it's null because the line hasn't been executed yet. Hover over it, and it has Tom in it. So it read the first line, and now it's going to say hello world, and it's done. F5, and we're done. All right, that's nice and all, but not too useful. Let's create a loop so it loops through the file and reads every single line. So the way we would do that, if you remember, we can look at our help on Google, which we found. One of the best ways of doing this is, I'm not going to do it this way because I want to go even more basic. I'm going to copy this part, while, the while statement, I got to be honest, in Visual Studio you can hit Control K, Control D, and it will format everything for you. But here you have to do it manually. All right, we do. It's that squiggly line's there because we don't have a list. That was in their code, not ours. And I'm going to select like this, hit Tab. Now I'm going to take this line. I'm not going to read the line anymore. I'm going to set it to string.empty. It's going to start out empty. Always keep things nice and neat. Now remember, we didn't call our stream reader, we called it SR. So we're going to do SR.readLine. This is saying while line.readLine is not null, do a loop here. This bracket and this bracket means it's going to do it over and over and over. If there were 100,000 records in that 100,000 names in this file, it's going to read them all. It's going to read every single one. There's only 4, so it's going to go through 4 times. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to say, oh well, let's just look at it for now. String s equals line. We're going to create a new variable every single time. We're going to pass line into s, and let's just take a look. I'm going to put the breakpoint right here, and it's going to run. It's going to create a new stream reader. It's going to read a line, read a line, read a line, read a line. And we run it. Okay, so we've got a line. The first line is Tom. Now if you hit F5, it will go all the way down and through it again. F5, Bill, F5, Sam. Now I'm going to hit F10 instead, and we can step line by line. Read. Guess what? Now we've got Sarah, and both of these variables say Sarah, and then we're going to continue on and execute. That time it looped through. All of that's fine and good. That's great. But what do we want to do though? Okay, so now we're reading and we're not doing anything yet. So what I wanted to do now was, for exercise, let's create a new file and write every single line into that new file. How about that? Now, how do you think you would do that? Well, we've got a stream reader, so wouldn't there also be a stream writer? SW equals new stream writer. And of course, this is why I made that working folder plus. All right. Now I'm using the same working folder over again. That's why I put this in a variable, so I don't have to type it over and over. The reason you would do this is so you'd only change it in one place. If you had to make this change and this was used 50 times throughout the code, you'd only have to do it once, and you wouldn't forget maybe the 3rd or 4th or 7th one. Okay, that's why you put this in something like the folder path in a variable. Now we're going to call this output.txt. All right, so we've got a reader and a writer. And what do you think the writer does? Of course, well, let's find out. You type in SW dot and write line. It does the writing activities. And by the way, you need to, I'm not exactly sure why, but you need to close readers and writers. You need to manually close them. I'm pretty sure you have to. Any kind of data readers, you have to do that. All right. So we've got an output file. So what we're going to do now, instead of putting this in a string and doing nothing, guess what we're going to do? We're going to do a write. SW.WriteLine. And we're going to write our line out. It's going to pretty much copy the file from read line by line and copy it over. So let's walk through this. Working folder, reader, writer, declare a line variable that is used in the next statement, loop through every single line, no matter how many there are. We could come in here and add a name if we wanted to. Oh, Craig, how about that? And you have to save it, otherwise it won't know, right? So it's going to loop through every single line. Now it's going to be 5 times, and it's going to write those lines to, guess what? Output. Let's run it and see what happens. In fact, we can sit here and watch. We might be able to watch. I need to make this even for you. Watch the file appear in here. We're going to step through it from the top. All right, let's run debug. All right, F10 writer. Guess what? There it is. You see it pop up? Now it's an empty file. Why is it called temp out2? That's because for whatever reason it found, well, I made output. This is the one it made. It's probably, every time it runs, it's probably going to overwrite this file. So just so you know that. All right, so we've got an output file that has nothing in it. I know it has nothing in it because we haven't done anything with it. All right, now we've read a line from the input, Tom. Now we're going to write a line, Tom. We're going to read and write, read and write, read and write, read and write. Now, obviously, if you were really going to do it this way, you would just do a copy, right? If you're just going to copy the file over. So now we have our input, which we know. We already knew that, but we don't know this. Guess what? It's exactly the same. Now, you can start to see that once we get this line into memory, which is what we're doing, we're putting this data, we're pulling it from somewhere, we're putting it into memory so we can do something with it. And this is the basis for a lot of the reading and writing to databases. So for example, if you're doing web work, you will take the form data that they type in on the form, the web form, they hit submit, you'll get it in a variable and you'll save it to, you could save it to a text file just like I just showed you. Or you might save it to a database or Excel or whatever your company wants. So what we did was we wrote it to a line, but let's make this even more useful. In this next part, I'm going to introduce another concept which is based around, we're going to go a little bit more advanced, but this is based around object-oriented programming. And so let's first of all look at our data. Let's say we had a record or database that had customer information. Let's say it had Tom, and let's say he has an ID. Let's give him an ID of 1, Tom, and let's give him a male. He's a male. 2, Bill. He's also a male. 3, comma, also male. 4, comma, Sarah, female. Ooh. Let's have another female. We need 5. What's a good female name? Jessica. Okay. Now this is very similar to what you might find in a CSV file or comma separated by value file. Or this might be in a database. This would be field 1, field 2, field 3. This is a very simple representation of a database. One table with 3 columns. Column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Name column and gender column. So your table would have 3 columns and many rows, okay? That's what we're doing here. We're pretending like this is a database, our input. Now I save this. Now guess what we're going to do? We're going to create I'm going to describe what a class is. And a class, I actually had a long time understanding. It took me a long time to really understand this, because the word class is confusing to me. It just is. I want to call this not class. I want to call it model. This is really a model of what your data looks like. And in this case, the way I would create a model, you call it class, but it's a model of, it would have 3 properties. Your class would have an ID, it'd have a first name, and a gender. And let's build that right now. Now, normally I wouldn't create a class in the same file. Normally you create a brand new file, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep it all on one page and keep it simple. So I'm afraid if I wish I could show you more of the screen, but if it gets any smaller, if I make it any smaller where you can see more of the screen, I'm afraid you won't be able to see it. So let's start out with public class. Let's call it customer. These are customers. All right, now you've got a class customer. It doesn't do anything. It's not an instance of a customer. It's a description of a customer. It's a model of a customer. It's what one would be like. And remember, we said it had. We're going to create a string ID, string name, string gender. Now, normally you wouldn't use string for ID. You want it to be numeric so you could increment it. But I want to keep things super simple, super easy. And I want to demonstrate how an object works and how we can add items to an object and not get too buried down in type details. So public tells us that you don't have to have public, but that tells us that any other class can use it, okay? You don't have to have that. It's called an access modifier. Also, variables can have access modifiers. I'm going to go ahead and make all of these public. Public means anyone, anywhere can see this. It's wide open. It's public. All right, now there's another concept called properties, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to create 3 variables, and we're going to populate them, and we're going to, with all of the values from our table. All right, now how do we do that? Let's suppose we created, remember we're reading all the lines here, so we have all the data. Now, when you have data in a comma-separated form, you have to split it apart somehow. And we know how to split it because there's a comma in between them. So we want to read a line, but the problem with reading a line is, guess what? We've got a line with commas in it. We don't want the commas. We want to split it out into 3 variables. So the way to do that is to create a string array, which we can talk about arrays later, but what they are is it means there's many of string in one variable. String line values equals line. Remember, our line has the line in it. So the line would have, that line right there would have this entire value in it. So what we want to do is split it up. So what we're going to end up with is an array where you can access all 3 values, ID, name, and gender. So what we want to do now is create 3 more variables. We don't have to do it like this, but we will. We have an ID, and it equals to line values. And then we're going to reference the first value, which is number, not 1, but 0. String name is, guess what this should be? The second value in the array is name. String gender equals line values. Guess what? It's 2. So in the numbered chart, what we have in an array, it always starts out in an array as 0, 1, and 2. We can talk about arrays later, but this is how you would split it up. This is how you get the values. If we happen to add whatever address 1, it would break that out, and that would be number 3, but we don't need to go beyond where we're at. Okay, so I'm going to save this, make sure it's saved. Good. Now that we've got these values, we're going to use that class we created down here, which I should have used to begin with. So I'm going to create, before all of this, let's create a customer. Cust. I like to use my, because that tells me that I made this variable. So what I'm doing is I'm creating an instance, a single instance. This is a single instance of that class. Once you create an instance, you can then use the instance. Okay, for example, let's get this out of the way. Let's take a look at my cust. My cust, if you hit dot, guess what? There's your property, gender, ID, and name. You can do dot gender equals, let's just hard code it for now. My cust dot ID equals 99. That's a string, 99. My cust dot name equals Fred. Now let's run this and ignore everything else we've done so far. Let's run this to this point and see what we did, because what we did was we hard coded this value. Let's run it. Hard code means you just typed in some unchanging data. It's generally a bad thing to do because it's useless, but in demonstration purposes. So we created a customer, we assigned gender to F, ID to 99, and Fred into my customer. So my customer is now a completed object. If you typed in my cust, you would have values with gender, ID, and name. And so you can imagine a very complex customer with address, credit card, city, state, zip. An entire object is now in this nice, neat little package that you can pass off to a function, you can pass it off to a database, you can pass it off to a web service, and that service can take that single customer and process a credit card or something, right? That's why we're doing this. This very powerful concept. You need to really understand this. We created a model and we populated the model with data. Now, I've hard-coded that model. Let's not hard-code it. Let's take it from the file that we use. So remember, we have our ID here. We should do this in the same order so it's not confusing. It went ID, name, and gender. I got that all wrong. Control X. All right. So we know line value is 0, the first item in the text file reading. You cannot use this before it's declared. You have to declare and then use, not use then declare. So it has to be done first. That's why this is all logic. You have to do things in order. This is why a logical mind will prevail in programming. So I'll explain again what we're doing. Sorry if I'm over-explaining, but I want to be very, very, very clear. Okay, remember, we are opening that file, the input file. We're reading it however many lines, line by line. Let's look at it again. It has 3 values per line, 1, 2, 3. We're splitting them up. We're putting them into the ID, the name, and the gender of a class object instance that we created. Now, do you see any problems with this? The problems are, as we read, it's just going to overwrite the customer over and over and over. And guess what you're going to end up with? You're going to end up with the last customer. So if you run this, what you'll end up with is Jessica, and all those others will be gone. But that's okay for now. Let's run it and watch it happen anyway. And we'll fix that problem in a second. Run. Okay, so we're splitting the values. Let's take a look. All right, notice it says 0. I don't know why it does. How do you see the other values? I don't know. In Visual Studio Microsoft, you can see all the values, but it doesn't matter because we know them anyway. All right, ID. Guess what? Oh, I forgot to do something. All right, when you split, you have to tell it what's the delimiting character. Guess what? It didn't know to split. See? It's a good that I made that mistake. So I have to tell it, oh, split by what? Oh, the comma. Duh. All right, let's run it again. Now we have it. We run the line. Guess what? We've got 0. It tells you right here what's in it. So if you make any mistakes, you can go back and fix them. So line number 1 has 1 Tom M. All right. Now let's put that into our object. Now look at our customer. Guess what? ID is 1. Gender is male. He's Tom. Now guess what? We're going to do this all over again. We're creating a new my customer. We're blowing away the old one. And we're putting the second value in there, M2 Bill. Now we got M3 Sam. Now we got F4 Sarah. Okay? So we're just writing over and over and we're closing, and that's a very important concept. We've just populated from a data file an object that we created. This is a pretty powerful concept. You really need to understand this. You really need to play around with it. Now we're going to take it one step further and make it even more powerful. So we're going to use what's called, now this is an advanced concept, but it's very important anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and do it just to show the usefulness of it. System.Collections.generics. Okay, there's an object under generics. This is a generics topic called a list. So if you have a list, you can make a list of anything. You can have a list of strings. Let's get rid of all this stuff and let's demonstrate what a list is. My strings equals new list string. Okay, so what you get with this is you can now have like an array of strings. So I'm going to take my strings, which I just created, and add Sam. I just manually added Sam to that string list. Okay, my strings, same thing, add, oh, I don't know, Joe. Okay, you see how you can create a list of strings? This is a very powerful concept. But guess what? It's generic. So you don't have to add strings. You can add integers. If I have a list of integers, let's say I have a list of credit cards. I could put them in here. Maybe a list of double or decimal. 1, 3. Now if I ran this, I would have a list of, I would call it my ints. Let's leave it at my strings. I would have a list of integers. Okay? Now let's take that one step further. Because it's generic, I can use anything, any object. I'm going to make a list of customer, our custom object. If you ever hear of what's something called a custom type, that's what this is. We made our own type. We made a type of customer ID. You can't make your own integers. It's not a custom type. You can't make your own string, but you can make your own custom type. So we're using a custom type of customer, right? Now guess what you can add to customer? You can't add strings. You can't add integers, but you can add types of customers. I'm going to call it my customers with an S, just to show and prove that there's more than one. You might even call it my customers list or something. I'm going to call it my customers because that's many. This is one customer. This is many customers. You cannot add many to this, but you can add many to this. So what you would do in this case is my customers dot add. Guess what we're going to add? My cust. So now as it loops, we're not going to get rid of my customer anymore. We're going to add it to my customers, which is outside of this loop. We're going to add and add and add and add and add. At the very end of the day, we're going to have a bunch of my customers down here. And then we're going to be able to do more with it because we won't just have one, but we'll have all of them. Now I'm going to set the breakpoint here. And let's run it and see what happens. All right, we're splitting the line over and over and over and over and over and over. We're adding it and we're adding it. All right, I'm going to hit F5 and just skip through it, skip through it, skip through it, skip through it. Now, guess what would be in my customers? We have in level 0, we have the first customer, Tom. In the levels 2, we have Bill. Level 3, we have Sam. We have all the customers in one object. Very powerful concept, because now we have one object and many people in it, and we can do all kinds of things with that. We can filter this list by gender, which is where I was going with this. I want to filter this list by gender. And if you, many times you will have a data set. You will have customers, you will have, I don't know, a fleet of vehicles, you have a bunch of vehicles, you'll have finance records or something. You will want to filter them. You know, whenever you're on a web page and there's a grid and you can filter at the top and get like, put things in order, and you can say, I want all the males in the 5K category on this date. Well, this is one way to do it. Now let's take this list that we created. Let's take that list and let's separate it into gender categories. So one really cool thing you can do, and this is very important to do also, when you're writing a program, you don't want it to just get longer and longer and longer and longer and get messy, okay? So let's break this out into a function. No. Oh, I thought I was writing, for a second I thought I was writing JavaScript. Hang on. Get customers from file. Now, I'm going to explain this in a second. I'm creating a function that's going to very neatly get everything for me. All right. Watch this. So this is one way you can clean up your code. I'm going to declare my customers, and I'm going to take all of this code and put it in its own function. That way I don't have to look at it anymore. It just works. I'm going to put it in here. A function takes in parameters and it returns something. And this is the type that it returns. And I forgot that I need to declare my customers within. It's telling me I didn't declare my customers. All I'm doing is making a tight little function that returns all that work I did. And guess what? It has to return something of type. What does it have to return? It has to return a list of customers, and I'm going to return my customers. So guess what? I don't even have to look at it anymore. All I have to do is call get customers from file. I'll explain this in a second. I don't think I can do that. Equals new list. You have to create the entire new thing, then set my customers equal to get customers from file. I'm still not sure why that's not working. Probably. If you hover over the error, it should tell you what's wrong. Alright, I'm going to do a build and maybe it'll tell me. What's wrong? Okay, so there's a concept called static, and I won't talk about it today, but this needs to be static. It means you don't need to create an instance of it. Alright, so very simply, I tightened up my code. I put all that work into a single function, which takes nothing in. It does the same work that we just talked about, right? Only it returns a type of my customers in what's called a function called get customers from file. Now, see this nice little thing over here? You can tighten that up and you don't have to look at it anymore. That's the value of clean code. If you've ever worked with bad code, you'll see that it's just strewn throughout and nobody took the time to do what I just did. But look at this. All I have to do is create my customers and call get customers from file. And it loads it and we're done. All right? Now, let's run this and I'll show you. We don't care what this does anymore. Somebody else could have written this. As long as it works. I run it. I'm going to jump straight to this breakpoint. Guess what? My customers are filled with those names. Watch, I'll prove it to you. I'm going to add another name. Oh, Rhonda. Also female. I'm going to save Rhonda to our database. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. I run it. And guess what's in my customers on the 5th row? Rhonda. See, we're loading up this piece here. Okay, so what I wanted to show you though was what we're going to do for the final piece is we're going to split out the men from women and we're going to write it to another file. Okay, we're going to do a stream writer to another file. So let's first do the split out. Now this gets a little advanced. It gets a little weird. It uses a link query, but I just want to show you that it can be done. What we're going to do is once you have my customer, you have a list of customers, you can query it now, and you can say, let's create 2 more lists. Okay, one to store the men, one to store the women. Let's come down here. I'm going to copy them and I'll say men. Let's just call it men. Men customers, women. Okay? They're the exact same type as that, but they're empty. We're going to take the men. Let's load up the men first. No, women first. Come on. All right, women first to show that I'm not doing any tricks and that they are second in line in our record set. All right, so how do we filter a list? First of all, we're going to set women equal to my customers S, okay? All that would do, if we didn't do anything else, is it would load the new women with all of them, and they would take everyone. It wouldn't make any sense. But we're going to do a dot where, and we're going to use a lambda expression. This is very advanced. I don't expect you to know this yet. We haven't talked about it. You might know it, but you might not. It's equal to F. Now, the problem with this is this type of object is not a list of customers. This type of object is, I don't know what it is, but it's not a type. You have to convert it to list. Okay, I think that'll work. Okay, I think the single quotes is saying it's a character. It's actually, oops, double quotes means string. Okay, this expression is saying take everything from my customers where x.gender is equal to F and then convert it to list and put it in the women. Now, guess what? Let's just copy this. Come on, let's do that. Take some shortcuts. Now we're going to change this to guess what? Oh, men. This might be case sensitive. You have to be careful of case sensitive all the time, okay? Alright, nice and clean code. Everything is clean. Always keep it that way. We've got our customer class. We have get customers, and we are filtering women and, oops, that would be men. Now, let's run it down to this point. Just let it run. Alright, guess what's in the men? All the M's. Sam, Bill, Tom. What's in the women? Rhonda, Jessica, Sarah. How cool is that? Now what you can do to that is if you wanted a list to display a list of something to a grid on the someone sends you show me F's, all the F's, you show all the F's, and this would be your object that you would return to the screen. You could bind this to a data grid. ASP.NET has this data grid that you can bind to, and it will just, all the women and all the data will just show up. It's really cool. Alright, but what I'm going to do is one last thing. Now that we've done all that, we're going to write that out to another file. Let's do our stream writer. SR equals new stream writer, and where's my path? I don't have a path, but I'm going to do just hard code it anyway. Temp. I'm going to say that's min temp min.txt and stream writer. Alright, I'm going to use the same exact object and create a new one, and I'm going to call it women. Now, how about SW? Dang it. This is programming. Hope you have patience. Alright, now we're going to do a for each. Tab, no. Var, for each customer type in what? Women? Men. For each customer, and then you have to give it a name. My dude. In men, for each customer type, what are we going to do? We're going to write line. We're going to write a line, and we're going to use my dude dot ID plus space plus my dude dot name plus space plus my dude dot gender. Alright, now this is going to rewrite to a new file, saving that in the database. And we're going to do the same for the women. Dang it. Shift tab will bring it back. My lady. It's good to use well-named variables, so somebody else. Alright, so this is going to write out. Let me explain this. So for each my dude in men, which we loaded up here, all the men, we're going to write a line. And that each object in that collection is going to have the dude's ID, name, and gender. Okay? Same for the women. It's going to do the same exact thing. It's going to write it out. And then we need to do an sw.close. Now watch this. I'm just going to run it. I'm not going to step through it. And let's take a look. We have women. Oh, what happened? Nothing's there. Never fear. Why are there no women? Hey, guess what? We have a mistake. My lady in men. Look at that. I did for each customer lady in men. See? It's not going to find any ladies in men. Need women. Now let's run it again. It's called debugging. Now, there's our women. We've separated. And there's our men. Well, now there's no men. What did we do wrong? Anyone see a mistake? It's probably because I'm using the same stream writer. Yeah, that's probably it. I need to do a sw.close. My experience tells me that something's going on because it didn't appear in one and the other, then it appeared in the other, not the one. It tells me there's something going on with this stream writer. Now let's run it again and see if that fixed it. So I closed it and opened it again. And I bet you that's it. Men and women, both, all their IDs are in there and we're all good. So you can see how valuable that would be if you had 10,000 records and you wanted to sort. Somebody said, give me all the men in these 10,800 records that are over the age of 40 and that earn more than $100,000, right? You could, if you had the database, you could pull those up just like that with a program. You could write it to a file, you could write an Excel sheet, you could push it in a database, you could push it. I just showed you. I'll post all this code in the description. You can copy this and run it, but the biggest thing you need to understand in all of this is not the link queries and everything, but how you take an object-oriented class and you make your own, and you can make your own properties, which we'll talk about later, but these are variables. You can make your own first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, age, gender. You can make vehicle. You could have a vehicle class with color, number of wheels, number of whatever, make, model, year, history, all that. You can make any type of object and then use it in this manner. And notice how I was able to, you could pass it into a function and have the function do something with it. All right, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something from it. There's millions of more.